Well, welcome everyone for this second session of the DevTools Porto. It's very nice to have Danielle from Coverflex speaking about Storybook today. And so I'll just let Danielle take the the stage.
Thanks. Is my mic on?
I think so, but
Okay. Can everyone hear me? Okay, cool. All right, so thanks everyone for coming. This is I'm going to be talking about Storybook, as you can see, and how you can use it as a toolkit for building UI. And mostly I'm going to be talking about the web, so like your standard web apps, React, Vue, and whatever. For me, my perspective is from React because that's what I work with, and also more specifically, my experience with Storybook, I maintain some projects for React Native Storybook. So, but I also use the web Storybook at work. So, for example, at Coverflex. And so, talking of which, I'll just put this slide up and just to introduce myself. Most people actually call me Danny. I'm from the UK and actually part Brazilian, but it's not super important. I speak Portuguese also, but still learning. So if you want to come talk to me, don't feel afraid to speak Portuguese. And yeah, these are the projects that I maintain: Storybook React Native and add-on React Native Web. So React Native Storybook is like an in-app storybook for so you can look on a phone and see Storybook rendered on the device, and you can also deploy it on like a app distribution thing with like Firebase or something, and then you'll be able to basically provide that to like designers or testers, and you can sort of verify the stuff that you're doing in there. Although I guess I haven't really said much about what Storybook is, and I'll get to that actually in the next few slides. But yeah, those are the two that I maintain, and the React Native Web one is to kind of bring some of the features that weren't possible to do in React Native over to React Native projects, so that you can actually use some of the cool features that actually I'll be showing today. So all of this stuff you should be able to do actually with that add-on, and maybe in the future I can add those features also to React Native if I have the time and so on. So first of all, what's Storybook? So it's in the simplest terms, it's like a sandbox for developing components. And when I talk about components, like parts of UI, like a button or input, and you can basically take one component and develop it on its own. So without having to set up your application state or navigate to a certain place in your app. This is especially useful if you have like a sort of an in-app router, so where you can't just go to URL. Maybe you have to like go through a whole bunch of different UI states, and so you'll be able to actually just render it however you like inside of Storybook, just on its own. And it's also, what's really interesting about Storybook is it's portable, and you can deploy it as its own web app. It doesn't run inside of your app, it runs like in its own sort of runtime, so you can deploy it separately. And that's cool again for like handing off to testers or designers. And another really cool thing is that it's extendable in a lot of ways with add-ons, and you can basically add in all kinds of cool features, and a lot of those are what sort of enable the features that I want to talk about today, especially like testing and things like accessibility. So if I just wanted to also like give a shout out to this project, which I'm going to be showing a little bit of. It's called Middle Drop, and it's by this guy called Jan Braga, and he's one of the co-maintainers of Storybook. And he's basically set up this project to show like an example of like all the cool stuff you can do with Storybook. And that's also kind of what I want to show off in this presentation, is some cool stuff you can do with Storybook. And so, and if you're wanting to learn about Storybook, it has a really cool course as well called Storybook for React Apps. But enough of that. And here's an actual Storybook, and it's the Middle Drop project. It's a screenshot from there anyway. And the things I want to point out, so that we, if you don't know about Storybook, this is the sort of basics that you need to know about. This is it's a web app, right? And it has a basically like this nav bar where you can look at like a list of all your components. And I like to think it's all in the name. Storybook. It's a book of stories, and in Storybook, a story is like a variant of your component, right? So it's like a book of components and all the variants that you have. So if you look, I think you can see my mouse here, right? This button, that's like one of the components. And then here is a story, so it'll be like a variant. So if I were to go to this clear one, this would not have a black background anymore. And this here, yeah, this is the preview where it renders the actual stories. And then you can see there's a whole bunch of other stuff that come in from add-ons, but we can have a look at that in a second. So, and how do you actually, bring these, make these components and stories? Well, you're gonna use a standard format, which is sort of created by the Storybook guys, but it's actually a generic format that you can use, and it's based just on JavaScript essentially. So you just need to provide like a default export, and a few exports are the actual stories, and I'll show an example. And basically how it works is you'll have some configuration, and generally what you do is you say like look for all the stories files, and those will be those that show up in the sidebar. And this is an example, and that's how you would define like the component itself. So this you can put in some metadata. Here's this one is saying that the title is my component, and then it will show up in the structure like path2 will show like a folder saying it's in here, this path, and then 2. But it's not so important. It's just to get an idea about how it actually works. And if you look where the red line is, that's a named export, and that would be the actual like variant of your component, the story itself. And you can see that you can also pass some like properties here, like in this case we have args, and those are just passed along to the component as like props. So if you know about React, then yeah, your props are like the arguments for your component. And of course, Storybook does work with other frameworks, not just React. But this here is the actual Storybook. So if I just sort of navigate around a little bit, you can see already that I can now look through the different states of this component. In fact, if I just move this down, we can have a look at just quickly at some of the interesting things you can do here. So for one thing, I can update the text in here, and you'll see that the button text updates. And so you can already see, like if you're developing a component and you want to see how it might look with, I don't know, like really long text or whatever, without text even, you could just quickly check how that would look without having to go into the code and like make a change. And not only you, but as a developer, but maybe you as a designer or whatever, you don't have to know how to use code in order to like look through the components. And this is something that's really cool as well if you make like a components, like a design system, or like a library for whatever package. And then you maybe just want to show off some documentation of this is how our project works, but here also you can see a couple of like tabs and like things to navigate around. And you can see, for example, if I click the button, well, not when it's disabled, of course, there will be an action here. So I can also see like what's happening when I click this button. I can see a couple other things like accessibility. So, important also to make sure that our apps are usable for everyone, people using screen readers and so on. And these features are like add-ons in Storybook that you can just add to your projects, and you already can get an idea if you're missing anything in terms of accessibility and so on. And there's a couple more in here, but I'll get to those later. There's also one here that's for mobile. So on mobile, you also want to make sure you do certain things slightly differently, like you need to have touch targets, like it's saying here. This actually got a warning because the width of this component is too small. So if I just enable this measurements add-on, I can see that the width is only 26. And it's saying here that in order for it to be accessible on mobile, you would need to have it at least 32 pixels. So just some guidelines that you could use, and I would just scan them when you go to the story and check these things. And just there are some cool little features in here you can check out. This one is really cool. Interesting that you can do. You can add like a color filter to see what it might look like for people with different types of vision. Like this one, like if you have like bad vision, you would see it like that, and so on. But yeah, like in here, I think there's also like a theme picker. So you can imagine if you're having to test for multiple themes, you could switch between them quickly. And so this is the basic idea that I wanted to show about like, what is Storybook and, what are the basic things you can do with it. But what I'd like to do also is sort of get into some of the maybe newer features that are not as well known, but that now enable some pretty cool things that you can do with Storybook. So if I just get out of here, also just to basically quickly go over some use cases that Storybook has. Like I mentioned, you can have like a component library and just quickly show off all the components that you have. You can, when you're making web applications, quickly, make up a couple of components without having to go through the UI and everything, like I mentioned before as well. And then, yeah, like documentation. One thing I didn't show actually, but I can show real quick. You can actually use MDX in Storybook. So it's a markdown format with some like interactivity. So here you can see that they're actually in this Storybook showing off all the typography, all the different like font sizes and everything. And so, and it's kind of quite flexible. Even here, if you look at the button, it generates some documentation automatically. So you can see like all the props. And in Storybook, we call these like args. And the args, they will automatically pick them up if you have TypeScript, or you can tell it specifically what your args are as well. And also one thing that I did forget as well was that you can check different viewports, which is handy if you want to check like responsiveness. So, but anyway, as I was saying, let's move on. Testing is the feature that I want to kind of focus a little bit on today, because I think like it's been a pretty new feature recently. We've had some changes to the CSF format, which is that thing I mentioned where you define the stories and the components, which components are being visualized in the Storybook. And now there are some new features basically that enable you to test things inside of Storybook through CI, and sort of it works in tandem with a lot of things that Storybook already does. And you can even bring in like automatic accessibility testing, like all those accessibility checks that you saw in that tab for the add-on. They also work in the CI. So, and to make those things work, you might think, okay, well, my Storybook, I only want to do like simple components, and I don't think it's going to work for the more complex components. But Storybook actually provides a lot of cool things to enable more complex components as well. And so like when you can test even your entire app in Storybook if you really want to go out there. And I'll actually show an example of that. But basically, if you are familiar with mock service worker, it mocks your responses in REST or in GraphQL, and you can use it if you're already using it in your project. Even you can just reuse all the config you already have, and that's actually something that I've been trying out at Coverflex, where we have like a mock version of our app, and we already had all our mocks defined. And to put it into Storybook and just mock a whole screen of our app, all I had to do was just take the same config and put it into the Storybook config, and it's already working. And so then I was able to take a whole screen and just put it into Storybook, and then with the testing features that are enabled with the new features and things like chromatic, which I can get into later, you can automatically test like full screens. You can add some more like interactions as well, and you can visualize it all whilst you're developing, so which I'll get more into as well. And then there's another thing here, decorators. So if you think about like global state or wrapper components that are required for like full screens to work, you can replicate all of that behavior per story or even globally. So one thing that I do a lot is, if there's a wrapper that we always have in the app, like maybe the user authentication, I'll create like a mock provider. And if you look at here, this decorator, this could be like auth provider, and then all of my stories will just act as if you're authenticated. But I can then override that in each story as well if I want to. So you can basically, any kind of component, you can do it in Storybook, as long as you just find the right combination of like parameters and things along those lines. And so this is something that I picked up from this blog post, and it's kind of like all of the different ways you can test in Storybook. And some of them are pretty new, like interaction and accessibility you could kind of do before, but now you can really do it with the introduction of this new feature called Test Runner. And Test Runner is what basically takes the tests that run just on your Storybook and puts them in CI, and it runs through like Jest. And so if you're not familiar with Jest, it's like a test runner for JavaScript, and it can do everything that you need a test runner to do. And what ends up becoming is a bit like you have your Storybook, but with some functionalities of like Cypress, if you know about Cypress. So it's just like an end-to-end testing thing, or integration testing. And yeah, you can test full user flows, like I was saying. If you have the providers and the mock requests with the mock service worker, you can do full user flows, and all within Storybook. And if you use something like Chromatic, you can even get visual tests automatically with their like automatic tools. But I will actually show some Chromatic features later, just because I think they're really interesting. So yeah, how does that actually work in practice? Well, there's a new play function that you can provide in CSF. So either, I think it's per story, and when the story finishes rendering, this play function will run. And what you can do is you can take like test runner, for example. It's like any sort of testing tool. You can use it sort of within Storybook at that point, where you can run testing library is what I meant to say. Testing library within Storybook, and Storybook actually re-exports testing library, which is like a really popular testing framework for just like front-end web apps. And you can actually use that within Storybook and run it through the CI and everything. And I'm going to actually show that off in a minute. And yeah, like this is what enables interaction testing along with the test runner itself. So now I would like to do a quick little live demo. So we can already see something's going wrong, but hopefully all will go well. So what I'm going to do is just sort of drag this over, probably to the other side, yeah. And I'll actually show you, how you might go about creating like some stories and some tests in those stories. It won't be a long demo, just a couple of like really simple ones, simple stories. So first of all, what I was saying before, when you have like you want to create like your stories file and you want to write CSF. And so how would you do that? Well, you can actually do it really simply. If you just need to create that export default, like I was saying. And actually most of the things that you put in here are optional. So I can put a title here, but even that is optional. You generally want to provide the button just so that it knows about the args and things, like the component itself, so that it knows where to pick up, certain details. But I think all of these are actually optional. But if I just save that now, I need to now add a story. So I put like a named export, and yeah, Copilot's already helping me out. If I put now, this is like a new syntax for CSF, but actually if you were to do the classic syntax, would be to just take like a component. So this is React at this point, but don't worry if you don't know about React. It's not super important about the syntax. It does work with any language. So now, is it complaining about TypeScript? Yeah, so what I need to do is pass the args. So this is one of those features with Storybook where you can pass props along to a component. It already knows, it should already pick up in here when it renders which are the props of your component. But so if I just put this here and, oops, sorry. Oh, I'm writing the wrong word. Okay, there we go. So now that button is already appearing, but what you can see is that I haven't put anything in the text, so it looks pretty weird. Now if I just type in something, I've got a story and there's almost nothing in my file. And this actually gets even a little bit simpler, because now with CSF3, you don't even need this bit. You just need an object. And then if I want to set some arguments on here, I would just do it like this. And this will be the default argument. And I would just put button. And in this case, I'll change it to be buttons and then reset. Yeah, so there we go. And this is already like pretty much all you need for the most simple story, right? But that's not what we're here to see, right? So actually what I'd like to do is go to this contact form and show how you might add some interaction testing here. So I just made like a really simple form. You know, it's not the prettiest thing ever, but it's nice and big so you can see it, hopefully. Maybe even I could zoom in a little bit. So yeah, like this is just a basic form. It has a little bit of you know, validation, and in here you can see there's already an interactions tab. And when I start putting things into that play function, it's going to start appearing here like some what passed and what failed. So now if I go to, I've already like imported some of the stuff here that we might need. So you can see we have Storybook testing library. And this is that which re-exports testing library with some of the Storybook features already built in and working. If I go here to the filled in form, I can already just go here and I'm going to first of all get the canvas element, because everything I only want to select what's inside the canvas. You could actually use screen as well if you want to, but I like to do it this way. And yeah, if of course, I'm already getting help from Copilot, but yeah, this is what I want to do essentially. I can use all the functions from testing library, and just like this will get me that first name input. And now actually I think if I save that, it might already even show up. We'll add something else in here as well. Let's do user event type. So now I'm going to type in to the first name. I'll put John, if all goes well. I'm on the wrong story, that's why. Okay, so there you go. You can see already in the interactions tab, you know, I've basically said, okay, I want you to run this interaction when this story renders. And this is the most basic case, right? Like I'm just typing something in here, but you can actually use this to navigate around your whole app, and then you can use it for things like demoing an app. You can add some delay and do some cool things. So right now I actually have like 50 milliseconds of delay, but it's also not necessary. You could just have it instantly happen. So like when you're running CI, for example, you don't want to put delays on things. And in those cases, you could have like a if CI and then don't put delay. Or you can have like a control here, custom one, which is what I'll show in a minute, which is a bit more, I'll show like the Mealdrop app has a more interesting example of this, where it goes through a whole user flow, and it has a little control you can switch on and off, which adds some delay and some animations to like the whole user flow. So now, you know, if I wanted to fill in this whole form, I can just, yeah, let Copilot take the wheel, and probably actually need to add some awaits in here because it needs to wait for the typing to finish. But yeah, if I just keep adding some stuff in here, I'll put an email, try to put a valid one. Okay, and yeah, I think I should, yeah, there you go. You can see already it's starting to fill. The only one that's missing is the mobile phone. Sure, yeah. So, oh, my bad. Okay. And of course, you know, even if you don't have Copilot, these are not super complex, especially if you're familiar with testing library. This is kind of what you might be used to. And now if I save that, it should start typing, unless I put the wrong mobile number, that's why. There you go. So now the whole form is filled in, and then I can actually go ahead and like do some assertions. So I can expect, yeah, for example that, but actually in this case what I want to do is just see if the button is enabled. So in this case, if I put an invalid input, my button is disabled, right? So let's say I want to just validate that, if I get the button here, okay, it's not helping. Sorry. Okay, yeah, and then that's not what I want, but if I take the button and just say, is it enabled? Now I can see here in the interactions tab, it's ran through all of those, the typing and the getting, and of course if it fails to find one of these, it will also fail. So you can actually use those as validations, or you could, all the different validations you can do in like UI testing you can do here. And if I were to go here and just set it to be disabled, it will also now fail in here and say, yeah, like I was expecting that button to be disabled, but it's not. And okay, you might be thinking, okay, I'm only seeing this in the browser, I need to validate that in my CI, right? Well, that's like I was saying, you have test runner for that. So if I just run yarn test storybook, it should run against my local storybook, and it will use playwright to basically run all the tests, and you can see that even I'm getting that same failure here. And then if I were to disable to enable it, in fact I can just scroll up a bit, and what you can see is it even gives you a link to the one that failed, and it'll tell you this element's not disabled, and that's like an iframe from the storybook that was running over here. Where am I? Okay, yeah. Sure.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, my question is, so it's great that it runs with Playwright. Do you still get all the benefits of Playwright, like with the whole timeline and not screen recording, but the other tools that it has? I can't think of what
that name. I'm not totally sure about, okay. But I know that you can actually use some of the options from Playwright, but yeah, that kind of stuff you'd have to maybe get on the Discord and ask maybe Jan or one of the other guys, but I'm more just used it in this way, so sure. I haven't gone that deep into it. But yeah, I think you can do you can, for example, test with all the different browsers, and I can pass in like the browser that I want to test on, and but that feature I'm not totally sure about. But you should be able to something that's coming soon as well is like test coverage and all this stuff. So hopefully all of the stuff that you expect it to do, it will be doing pretty soon. But it's a pretty new feature.
Sure.
But yeah, I think you can probably expect that kind of thing to work eventually if it's not already working.
Okay, great, thank you.
Cool. So now we have this error. We don't have any errors here. We've got a filled-in form, and I'm validating that my form is working in a sense. Maybe you might want a bit more to your test, but for the case of just demonstrating, let's say, okay, now I've got a running test that's all passing, and what I could do also is just set up a failing or a test for the errors in my form, just to check if the validation is working. And here I could like reuse basically the stuff. All of this is just plain JavaScript. So if I want to make some components and just put like the first name in a function over here, and it gets me all the elements, and I don't have to do all this every time, but just for the sake of demonstrating, I can put in like a invalid email, and if I go to the errors story, for some reason this one is not failing, but that's probably my mistake in the code somewhere. But what is going on? Enabled. Okay. In theory, it should be erroring, but it's not right now. Okay, that wasn't supposed to happen. But yeah, this is my bad probably in the code. Something is wrong, but let me just check if I like clear this input maybe. Okay, yeah, I don't know what's going on there, but in theory that would work, and you can do that, your test of the errors in your form. I think I must just have messed up something here, but let's imagine that it ran through, and then in this case these errors appeared, and I could like check each error that actually it's getting picked up and my form is working as it should. In this case, I guess I did something wrong, but I could, in fact, just sort of copy an example that I have, but you know what, let's leave it. Let's imagine that it worked, and I'll move on, I guess. So I have another example that I'd like to show, which probably will work a lot better than mine, and that's the mail drop one. And so this one is a little bit more complex, but I just wanted to show, you know, how you can set it up pretty simply, and the commands are pretty basic, and they shouldn't fail if you code your form properly. So if I just go into here, into the user flows, this is what I was talking about here. We got this demo mode flag. This is just a custom control that they've added to this project, right? And now if I go back to the interactions tab, and in this case, I guess I'll put it on the side so we can see better what's going on. If I rerun all the interactions, you'll now see an entire user flow with some fancy sort of delay and animations. And you can see like a whole user flow inside of Storybook, which you can also then run with Test Runner. And with the GitHub Actions integration that you can do with Test Runner and also with Chromatic, all these things will run through automatically on your CI, and you'll be able to, you know, test your user flows if you want to do it that way. And of course, it's up to you if this is how you want to test your app, or if you want to go a more traditional route. But I think it's pretty cool that if you really sort of commit to Storybook, you can do a bit of everything, you know, everywhere. You can do testing, accessibility testing, and even one of the things that I have in this project is I have a hook that will run the accessibility tests when I run Test Runner. So if you see like in this log, I think you can actually see, yeah, no accessibility violations detected. So it's actually running all those accessibility tests as well when you do the Test Runner, if you set that up. But yeah, like this is the interaction testing feature, and it's also one of the things you can do as well is like visual testing. And this play function sort of enables you to put your app into all kinds of different states, and then you can do those visual testing as well. So you could take screenshots of your app in all these different states without having to with any sort of stuff. A lot of times with Storybook in the past, you couldn't like do these interactions, and if you wanted to get it into a specific state, it's like, oh, I can't really do that. But now with the play function, anything you need to do with like events or like want to click here, you can do that now with just sort of, you know, selecting the element and clicking it with the testing tools that you're probably used to if you already work with React or with Vue, for example. So yeah, that's the testing feature that I wanted to show off. And what I'll do now is go back here and talk a little bit about what Chromatic actually is. So I've mentioned it a few times. I'm not affiliated with Chromatic, but I know them all pretty well. They are mostly like Storybook maintainers that work on Chromatic, and they're really nice guys. They make a really cool product, and it's basically a cloud product for Storybook, and you can automatically have all your stories that will be screenshot every time you run your CI, and it will basically tell you something changed, and you can compare like the two states between each other. And it also runs all of those interaction tests that we just saw. So even if you don't want to set up your own test runner and all that extra stuff, it's actually already automatically run for you in Chromatic. So that's what I've been trying out a bit at Coverflex as well. So, and I've been seeing some cool results with it. I think it's basically a really nice way to skip some of the difficult configuration you might come across, which comes with, you know, setting up CI, setting up servers. It will automatically deploy your Storybook to a server every time you make a commit, and you can also link to your branch Storybook. And so let's say you want to get some quick feedback on your design, you can just all the updates you've made and you want to send it to the designers, you can just say, hey, look, take a look at this link, this is the story for that thing that you updated, and it doesn't match your expectations. And you can do that and then quickly update it as well. You make a commit, and in the same link they just refresh and it will update there. And that, of course, you could do without Chromatic. And one thing they do that's really cool is they provide all the same tools for open source as well. Like Test Runner, Storybook Test Runner is kind of chromatic in a way, but you have to set it up all yourself, and you don't have the automatic deploys, but it will run, you know, all those interaction tests and so on. And you can set up visual testing with Test Runner. It just takes a bit more configuration, and you'll do that with like Jest and Playwright. So the reason I really wanted to bring it up is that it enables the Figma integration, which is also a new feature with Storybook and with Chromatic, and it uses those deployed storybooks that you get when you make your merges and so on, and it basically makes you able to see your storybook from your Figma project. And you could already in the past see your Figma designs from Storybook and also show an example of that. And now you can see it from both sides. So now your designers can complain at you, or you can complain at your designers and say, hey, like this doesn't look right, you know. And you'll see that now because I made a little Figma design as an example, and you know, I'm not a designer, so there you go. Basically, if I show now the deployed version, which is one of these, I think it's actually this one. Yeah, so this is like what I got from Chromatic. It's when I made this branch. So if I were to go over to the GitHub for it, I actually have it in here. Or is it? Yeah. No, I guess I put it back here. So I made a little example project here. This is why I put all the links in there. And this pull request has some like chromatic stuff that ran. Oh no, free Zoom is ending. If you work with Zoom, you're used to this. I guess I'm going over time, right?
Yeah, it's alright. I'll just put it together.
Okay.
Improve the depth.
Yeah. I'll go quicker now. So yeah, you can see that Chromatic has run here, and it's run for the Storybook tests. So I've actually set up both Test Runner and Chromatic, and if I were to look at the details here, you can see that the Storybook tests ran here in my CI, but if I were to also go back to the Chromatic one, you can see that it also runs it when you do the publish, and it will run, and you can see them in the UI of Chromatic. So if I now go to the UI review for my PR, you can see also like what happened in this, the visual changes in my PR basically. And I think I had one example open here of like what the actual comparison looks like. So it looks like this, and you can see like, okay, between these two commits, you had like these changes, visual changes. So if you're used to visual testing, it's exactly what you've probably seen before. But yeah, here's that deployed version of Storybook. And now if I bring this down, we could have a look at the design. I think it's actually on the inputs that I set it up. So I've actually gone ahead and linked up my design to the input story, and I can check also in all the different variations. So in this one it's filled in, this one it's focused, and then I could compare. And obviously you can already see the blue is different. If you're used to UI, developing UI, I didn't actually design it to spec, but the text is a little bit different, whatever, but the idea is you can see the designs there. And then also if I come over here, there's this cool Figma plugin called Storybook Connect, and now when I click on one of these components in Figma, I can actually see which one corresponds to each component in Figma. And then your designers it's like that age-old problem with front-end development. Is like, how do you communicate efficiently with UI and UX, and like how do they know that our design system is up to date with the designs? And it's just like another tool to help you with that. And yeah, basically I set up each of these, and it's really easy to do. If I see my deployed version of Storybook, let's say I want to add the button, if I just take this link and go over to Figma, and I don't know if this one already linked up, but if I unlink it, all I have to do is just paste it in there, and then it will load it from there. And this you add it, so if you're familiar with I've done something wrong here. If you're familiar with Figma, which I'm clearly not, you can basically just go to plugins, I think. Yeah. And then if you look for plugins and find Storybook Connect, that's how you use it. And I'm pretty sure right now it only works with Chromatic, but I would probably doubt that. And they might come up with a an open source solution for that, because they tend to do that. But if you're using Chromatic, it's one of those really cool features that you can already use. And yeah, I am coming to the end of the talk. Sorry, I know I'm going over, but yeah, so that's what I think is a really cool feature from Chromatic and from Storybook. Really nice if you're a UI developer. I'm always needing to check design back and forth, and so yeah, I think especially if you're working on like a design system, like there are people nowadays that work only on the design system. That's when you really need like that back and forth communication, I think. But yeah, like this is kind of what I hope to give. This is like the overview of what I hope to achieve in this talk. Is like, here's how you do each of these different things, right? You could develop in isolation, you could make complex components, but you can also do automated testing of sort of all these different ways of testing, and you can also see your designs in Storybook. Yeah, but that's it. I don't know if we have time for questions, but if you wanted to do questions, I left this in there just in case.
Ready? Thank you so much. Maybe we can.
Hi, thank you. Nice presentation. Your experience regarding the pricing tiers,
Okay.
are they enough? Do you know if we can self-host it?
Okay.
What's
Well, Storybook itself you can self-host. So
yeah, that's the
yeah, right. But I don't know about self-hosting Chromatic, because Chromatic itself is like the paid product. But I so far mostly use the free version. So you get a certain amount of snapshots per month in the free version, and then when you want to upgrade, I think you basically pay for snapshots.
Yeah.
And for me, it seems like there's enough. Like, unless I think when you need to start paying is when you have multiple projects or a really big project, and then every time your CI is running, you're running a lot of snapshots.
That's it.
So I can see how that would scale up, but yeah, I'm not totally sure about the pricing models, because I'm not part of their team, but I think they're pretty reasonable for what they offer, and I think it's like a really cool like managed service. And if you think about like DevOps, the whole like idea behind DevOps, where it's like instead of like having people hired to like manage your servers and all this stuff, you just you pay a service and you sort of cut out that whole like part of your development, which is based around the CI and everything. But yeah, I think you don't need Chromatic, right? And I think like if you really have like a lot of custom stuff, maybe you'll want to go with like Test Runner and set up your own like visual testing and all those stuff you can do without Chromatic. And that's all thanks to Chromatic as well, because they develop the same things for like open source. Perhaps not the Figma thing yet, but I don't know about that.
No alternatives still.
There are definitely alternatives to Chromatic actually, but I don't know about Figma, the Figma thing specifically, but there are alternative solutions for testing Storybook as well. But for me, I would go with like, if you don't want to pay for a service, I would just do like Test Run, set up everything with like Playwright, and you can achieve everything with just those. But what I really like for Chromatic is like, it's just no effort really. If you've ever been through the tutorial of Chromatic, it's like 2 steps, and for me it was like incredible. I've never seen such a simple setup for something that does a lot of things actually. And you can already, maybe there's a 3rd step where you have to paste the GitHub action. Oh my god. You have to maybe I should wait, or I guess I'll try to continue. But I was saying is that there's a GitHub action that they offer, and it's basically already all set up. So you don't even really need to configure that. So it all comes down to like how much you value the ease of use and the convenience that they offer. But you know, also it's free if you do it by yourself, of course. But time spent is not free. So yeah, it's same as any other service, I guess.
Okay, couple more questions. Sorry.
Sure.
This is not unit testing. Yeah, but can you get any coverage out of it?
Like just coverage stats kind of thing. Yeah, like there's actually I wanted to show that actually, but it's kind of a new thing that's coming. You're going to be able to see even coverage of a specific story in Storybook, similar to the interactions add-on. There you'll be able to see like the level of coverage and even the lines of code. I think they're using Istanbul to like analyze the code and basically give you the coverage. So you will be able to do coverage. I think what's difficult right now potentially is coverage, but if you wanted to say like write some tests with Storybook and some tests with Jest, getting the coverage to like match up is a little bit more complicated. But it's they know very well that this is a thing, and hopefully there will be a solution for that. And the way I think there are things that you would not want to necessarily test in Storybook, like I think the best use case is like actual interactions, and that's why they're calling it like interaction tests. And it's cool because you know when you're doing like Jest tests, you see just text output, right? But if I'm testing with Storybook with the interaction test, I'm seeing it visually. It's going there in the browser itself, clicking the button, and you know that to me it makes me a lot quicker as well because I can visually see the feedback. Sometimes when I have to write a Jest test, I'll write it in the interaction test and then paste it back because I'm getting the visual feedback. It makes me write the test quicker, you know, and it's a lot less daunting in my opinion. Like I don't have to hold so much information in my head about the specific test.
Sorry, last one, and this is a little bit, I don't know if it's a topic itself about building and making Storybook faster. I've been there.
So
been there.
I don't know if you noticed, but in my Storybook was pretty quick. But I also mine is pretty small, but I'm using Vite. So the difference here is with Webpack. So maybe it's a bit too like detailed for people who aren't familiar with those like bundlers and so on. But Webpack, you can do some cool stuff right now with they have like supported features for caching and lazy loading. There's the new Storybook Store v7 can do lazy loaded stories, and it will only load the stories as you click on them, and that actually makes the startup time really fast in comparison to how it was before. And for fast hot reloads, so when you save the file, it automatically refreshes. That's when you want Vite, because it's pretty comparable in terms of startup time, but the real like killer feature of Vite is the hot refresh, and that's what I'm using because I got used to it now and I can't go back. But yeah, it's really simple now to use Vite with Storybook. There's a builder. Now they've changed the config, so you can have different builders for Storybook. So in theory, you could have ES build Storybook in the future. But right now, yeah, you can choose to use Vite, and that should speed up. But I would suggest to look into some of the optional features you can use right now, which are like the caching and the V7 store. So those will make your Storybook a lot quicker.
Thank you.
No problem.
I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it. So you used React as an example, and you said it supports other libraries and frameworks as well. Can you mix them in the sense of, if we have two projects and one's in React and one's in Svelte, can we use Storybook? So therefore, is that possible?
You can compose Storybooks actually. So you can have, let's say you deploy two different Storybooks, you can actually render both Storybooks in one Storybook. It's kind of a weird thing, but yeah, it's possible to have multiple Storybooks in the same Storybook instance, and then you could have all the different frameworks running in the same one. It's doable, and you can find it in the documentation, I'm pretty sure. I've never tried it. I'm not a fan of like mini front ends and stuff necessarily, but I know there are like good use cases for that, and yeah, it's something that people already try, and I think module federation is supported already in Storybook. If you know about module federation, it's an interesting way of like reusing stuff. I don't know much about it, but I know that some people will come asking me if React Native Web supports it, and yeah, they actually managed to get it working. So there's a lot of interesting stuff you can do.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Yeah, with Astro coming out as well, which I'm like you, micro front end, like there's going to be a balance, but
well, Islands
Astro's
is slightly different.
So,
yeah, sure.
great talk, by the way. Thank you for the demo.
Thanks.
Messaging my community saying we should start using Storybook. It's really good.
Nice.
Okay.
Glad to hear it.
Maybe just one. Is there a way to do the reverse thing on the interactions? So you coded the interactions and you saw them. Is there a way to?
Oh, you mean like a macro kind of?
Just to click a button, like a play button, and I just do it, and then it's generating the code for me.
No, but that could be interesting. Maybe I'll bring up the suggestion. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I guess that's probably totally doable, and I think, you know, it's pretty new, it's pretty young right now, this feature with test run and everything. So I guess that's something they'll probably be interested in doing, and I know they're like really invested in these features because it's also really good for chromatic. So yeah, I would assume that could be coming, and I'll actually bring it up maybe to them because, you know, we talk once a month, so I'll probably bring it up in the next maintainer meeting.
So click the button and I get my whole application just written right for me.
That, you know, that would be nice. I don't
Right.
know about it, but
Let's give it up for Danny. Thank you so much.
thanks for having me. So,
Now we'll try to make it a very short just session about open source. So I'd like to invite Calvin.
sorry for going over so
No
much.
worries. Calvin and Eddie to join me. So maybe I think we can do it like, I don't know, 20 minutes, 15 minutes. I think 15 minutes will be good. Just a couple of questions. I think we have another mic here.
Check, check.
Yeah, I can do that. I guess if you're on the Discord, I can see but there's a...
Thank you. Now I'm doing like 10 minutes. We came from, I was saying Sarah's parents.
Yeah.
So we're in like 10 minutes away. You're right.
All right. So I'll just put a timer to make sure that
How long have we got?
I think 17 minutes is
17.
like
Okay, Eddie, talk less.
yeah. So I'll just try to I'll try to moderate a little bit. I mean, it's just pretty informal. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I think the topic is just open source, which is obviously a topic that is quite dear to, you know, I guess Danny. So thank you for that. And companies like Chromatic are really kind of inspiring enough so that other people can kind of promote it. So it's really kind of interesting to see that. So maybe I'll just take it off with, you know, what was your first contribution to open source and why? Just, you know, very quickly, just to set up the mood.
I'll go first, I guess.
Just don't forget the mic.
Yeah, it didn't sound like it was working. Does it sound like?
I think it's good. It's just for people on the web stream.
Oh, I see. I gotcha. To be quite honest, my first contribution to open source was my own open source project. I've spent a lot of time in the enterprise world using a lot of open source, and then I started building my own projects quite a while back, but I was using Azure DevOps at the time, and though you could make your projects public, it wasn't really set up for open source, but I knew Azure DevOps in and out because I used it for my enterprise experience. And then I got to a point where the project started getting bigger, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and commit and move everything out of Azure DevOps and move it over into GitHub.
best decision I ever made. Azure DevOps is fantastic. Don't get me wrong, and of course, are owned by Microsoft. But ever since I went to GitHub, I like it much better. And because I started doing that and everything, and with my projects and learning open source and GitHub in and out, that did give me the ability to go to a couple projects and stuff and contribute a little bit here and there.
Okay.
But to be honest, I'm so busy with my own stuff, it's hard to find the time to go to other people's projects. But I have a little bit here and there.
Makes sense.
So just to clarify, my first open source contribution, I'm going to show my age here now. There was no Git, there was no GitHub, and I fixed a typo on a PHP framework called Zen framework. And so my second contribution was the same, was a typo, same with my third, same with my 10th. And then I got a bit more familiar with it. And then I started contributing to code coverage and fixing bugs and so forth. So yes.
That's very cool.
PHP was your first problem. Hopefully I didn't offend anyone.
So what, like in your experience, what have you seen in terms of the evolution of open source? I mean, obviously GitHub has played a huge part on just promoting open source, across, the entire, even in enterprise world, right? I mean, I remember 15 years ago, like it was mostly built in-house and there was like, maybe 10% of it was open source. And I think if you look at it now, enterprise code or software, just with the level of dependencies, it's pretty much the other way around. Like maybe 80% of what actually gets shipped in the executable is open source, and maybe 20% is like actual code built by the developers. Is this kind of your feeling as well in terms of the evolution so far?
I've seen it go to 100%. So doing UK banks and also government departments in the UK, I've really seen them use open source 100%. And they've even started putting some of their work out open source, some of their libraries that they've built open source. I mean, the UK government now is open source by default. So before, back in the day, they had to say, well, why should we make it open source? You have to present a case to a panel, all the rest. Now it's the opposite. The project is open source. And if you want it private, you have to then present to a panel to explain why you want it private. And because you want to include passwords in the project, that is not a reason. So, which is really weird that people say that, but it unfortunately happens. So, yeah, it's definitely changed. It's changed for the better.
Yeah, I can chime in on that one. Being from all the enterprise experience that I've come from and working for anything from small startups all to like really, really large, complicated systems and stuff, it's just like he said. Back in the day, I'm dated just like he is. That stuff everything was private. We had no access to anything, and it was all proprietary, and it was this well-kept secret. Couldn't give it to anyone. Now it's completely different. The well-kept secret now is just all IP, and hey, let's just make sure that it's secure enough so somebody can't get into it, so our passwords, our secrets, our tokens are all safe, but I don't care if anybody else can see my code. It doesn't change anything. So, over time, everybody felt a lot more safe to say, you know what, it just makes a lot more sense to just use open source. Mm-hmm. So in the enterprise environments that I've been in, that's exactly how it is. A lot of open source is used. And of course, you get the older school companies who have that older school mentality. They have certain things that they will never, ever do, but they can't operate without open source. It's impossible nowadays. So.
But a lot of them don't realize they're using open source.
I see.
Which is
that's a good point too. They have no idea that they're using open source. So the developer's like, hey, I got stuff to do, so I'm going to go use this, and if they don't complain, they're going to use it.
So
they're going to be productive.
That's pretty cool. So today I saw that there is over 200 million public GitHub repos, but I guess we shouldn't say that there are 200 million open source projects. So what is nowadays, what constitutes, what's the difference between a public GitHub repository and an open source project? Is it like contributions? Is it, just some sort of almost, impact aspect to it? Like in your opinion, what's really make an open source project nowadays?
I feel like if anyone's trying to build a product so that way they can make money and sell it, which there's no shame in that. We all got bills to pay. We all gotta make money. We all got families. And nowadays there's a lot of bad people out there. So I think sometimes people think this has got to be private because I mean, this is a lot of work. I can't risk losing this project, having somebody else take it or take my idea. So if they want to be able to have that safety net in their mind, wrong, right, or indifferent, that if it's private, I have control over it and nobody can take it from me. I think that's partially what it is. I mean, I don't know if you would agree with that as well.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of repos out there, and I think the difference is a lot of them are public, but I still don't think that's open source. So I would then look at the licensing, because a lot of people think, well, I think there's two camps. One is, well, I put my code out there publicly, so therefore it's 100% open source. And there's other people in the other camp who say, I've put it there publicly, but it's not open source because I haven't put a license. And neither of them are right. It's actually in the middle, in that if you haven't put a license on it, open source or not open source, then you default to the GitHub's T's and C's, which basically means, if I remember off the top of my head, someone can fork your project and they can look at it, but they can't do anything with it. So it's kind of this kind of weird ground. So I always recommend people do that. So for me, I don't really care about the size of a project, how many contributions it is, as long as it's still alive. Like if someone raises an issue, do they get a comment back saying, great idea, we'll do this in the future, or don't like it, not going to do it, whatever it is. I think if it's active and got an open source license, and for me it's an open source project, I see people's GitHub profiles, customizations, the special repo, that's the repo that matches the name of their username. For me, that's open source because there's people collaborating. For me, it's about the collaboration, really. And that's why I love it that people are putting their blogs on there, because I see people putting their blogs on there and they say, oh, you do realize that the command's out of date. I've sent you a pull request and I've made changes for you. It's like, brilliant. Except, now my blog is kind of more up to date. And I think that's what's open source for me. I think open source started off with just code, but I really feel code's such a small part of open source now. But I could talk about that forever, and you're already looking at your watch, so I'm like, I better stop talking.
That's fine. I was just wondering now, there's just so many things happening all the time, so many web frameworks, so many things to look at. We were talking about Solid.js, Vertigo. What do you think are the biggest problems nowadays in open source? Is it, for example, that there is a lot of people trying to just get into it and they don't know how, or just the shift in the technology side? Or is it things like supply chain attacks that people don't know what kind of open source they have in their own things, so they might be liable both from malware or just copyright infringement or license infringements? What do you think are the biggest things that people should be aware of today when they just say, okay, I'm gonna start doing something with open source?
I mean, like you said about the security thing, I mean, just because it's free and because it might be popular and other people have contributed to it and it's highly used, that doesn't mean it's secure. Let's be honest. But the benefit is since it's open, you can get in there and dig around and see how secure it is. And since, another benefit is that since it is open, hey, I'm doing this in the open, the fact that people could find stuff and then be able to say, hey, this is not secure, you couldn't do that with private source. It's all up to that small group of people who maintain it. So I think that can be a problem, but that's a human problem in my mind. It's not a software problem. It's not a technical problem. It's a human problem to make sure that people can, do what they have to do as a human being to make sure they purposefully go out and make sure that they're going to use something secure. And then another thing I think would be trying to be able to get contributions and help. I think has always been huge. That's got to be really. I'm having a hard time getting people to help me on mine. It's not easy. Everybody has got a family. Everybody's got jobs. There's only so many hours in a day, and these open source people are out there day in and day out building all this software that makes the world run, and it's a lot of work. A lot of work.
I hope someone recorded that, because in a year's time he's going to have the opposite problem, which is what I have, and I get 2,000 GitHub notifications per day.
Yes.
And I have the opposite problem. I just can't keep up. I've got a team of maintainers who, like you said, have families, have jobs, and they do it all for free and they help. But still, there's just so much going on. I have the other problem.
It comes down to the same thing. It's just in a different angle. Time. I can't find people to find the time to help me. He can't find the time to even get it done because he's got too much to do. So it's a hard balance, and it's difficult. And people are trying to find different ways, like GitHub contributions, the sponsorship stuff, and everything else you can do. Open Collective, and I've been trying to take advantage of that, and I know you have as well.
You're stealing my answer.
Yeah, sorry. If you don't stop me, I'll keep talking too.
No, so it dovetails into what I was
Yeah.
going to say, which was I think the biggest challenge is funding. So
Yeah,
yes, you got
that's
GitHub
very hard.
sponsors, like you said, and it's great. I've got 22 sponsors. It's great. It gives me about $100 a month, and I'm really grateful for that. But I can't live off $100 a month. So I think companies need to, and I don't want to take donations from people. So everyone says to me, Eddie, well, you're on live streams, you know, you're on Twitter Space with I think our last Twitter Space had 6,000 people. Why don't you mention it? I don't want to mention it because I don't want to take money from the other people in the community. I want companies to put their hand in their pocket and do it. I think I saw some stats recently where Google and Microsoft were the biggest contributors financially, not time and resources, but financially to open source, and they contributed, I think, about $1 million each, which in the grand scheme of things for them is not really a lot. They contribute in other ways, so don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say that they don't do other contributions.
It's a lot to the project owners. It's not a lot to Microsoft.
Exactly.
And to be honest, I think that's the way it's going to end up happening. Is people are going to build all this stuff. All these companies are going to need it, and they're the ones that are going to give back. And the people in the world are going to expect them to give back. Hey, Microsoft, you guys are huge. You got a lot of money. Help these people out because what they're building helps the world. To expect all the other people out there that maybe is having a hard time getting by month to month, that's harder to ask somebody to say, help me out. So I think that's a good avenue. Go to companies. And I think a lot of people do that in some way, shape, or form. They go to companies and get help from them.
So what is your advice for like companies that, you know, like Chromatic is a good example, I guess. There's this trend of, you know, you pay for the service, like the hassle of not having to have a DevOps. You know, everything is open source, but you know, things have to run in servers. You know, we do that for you, and that's pretty much like the thing that you are paying for. Do you think that's sustainable from a perspective of like midterm in terms of, you know, because there's always a risk of, you know, the DevOps world becoming so easy to just simply say, yeah, AWS will just host it for you as well, and then you don't need like a Chromatic or GitHub will start hosting. I don't know, I'm just making stuff up. But do you think this like idea of, you know, just companies open sourcing as a model to get like adoptions and then to just like monetize on the hosting part, do you still think that this is kind of something that is going to continue for a while, or you're already seeing some trends different?
I love this model. For me, it's great because I think it's open source. If people want to host it themselves, they can. And most of the time, people will host it themselves for the first 6 months. I've been there 101 times, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to pay my $15 a month. Just take care of it for me. I don't want to do the upgrades. I don't want to do security patches. I just want it to work. Like you said, time. So I probably spend, I think I did a YouTube video on it about a year ago, maybe £500-600 a month on just services I pay for, £15-20 here and there. But for me, it saves me so many days or weeks per month that I'll gladly pay for it. I don't really host any of these services myself. I pay for all of them. Even for GitHub, I'm a GitHub star. I get the service for free, but I just pay every month because I just need just things to work. I don't want to hit limits of GitHub Actions or whatever. I want that unlimited amount. I just want it to just work because the hassle of something not working, I'll get like 100 DMs of people saying, by the way, this isn't working anymore. And for me to go to reply to all of those and say, thank you for letting me know, I fixed it. It's just, I just need things to work straight out the box. So I would pay for things. I mean, like StreamYard for live streaming, you're using OBS here now, which is amazing. And I did that for 2 years. And I just moved to StreamYard. It's not as flexible, but I just want it to work wherever I am in the world. I don't want to have to try and configure it. I just haven't got the time. As much as it's fun, I just haven't got the time to do it. So I just pay for that. So I think it's a good model, and I'll always be the first to just to pay.
Yeah, time is money, and that's just a fact. I'm the same way. I'm willing to, if something's going to save me a lot of time and bring a lot of value and help me, then I'm going to pay for it.
Okay, makes sense. Just, I guess, last question. Open source, like, you know, when I was growing up, was like the pinnacle of, you know, software developers. They were like the super cool guys. For example, you know, contributing to the Linux kernel was like, wow, the ultimate thing you could do to get the approval by Linus himself. And nowadays, you know, it feels in a way the same. Like it's hard for people that have only done like private, you know, just contributions to then, you know, be exposed in a way. And on the other side, it's also very easy for people to just contribute, like fixing typos and documentation things. Do you like? What's your opinion about an open source like developer? Is it still like, you know, the pinnacle of what software development should look like, or is it not something like that? I don't know if you have any thoughts on
I
that.
have. I can go first if you want.
Go ahead.
So for me, you're right. Back in the day, the whole Linux kernel, that whole pedestal, Linus and so forth. I don't like that anymore. I like to kind of, have a level playing field, like no gatekeeping. Fixing a typo for me is a contribution. If anyone finds, and you will find, typos in my projects, please fix them, because I might better, or someone whose English is their first language can read it, it makes sense, but someone who's using a translator, it's gonna fail, and they're not gonna understand what that word means. Is it a new word they need to learn, or whatever? So for me, that I want to lower the barrier to entry so everyone can join. But I don't like the idea of saying, oh, that person's got 100,000 followers on Twitter or 10,000 followers on GitHub. They're also, it makes no difference. Like, someone could be new to Twitter or new to GitHub or new to open source, and they could provide as much value, if not maybe even more value. And I like it that open source now isn't just about code. We collaborate with people, and when we get new people to our project, I love it, because for me, we kind of almost reset the project again, because you have the terminology, you have kind of quirks, what people are talking about already. But when someone new comes to the project, they say, oh, hey, Eddie, or maintainers, whoever it is, can you tell me about the project? And I always say to them, no. Please go have a look at the project, and if you can't understand it, there's nothing wrong with you, there's something wrong with our project, and we need to fix it. And they say, right, well, I understand what it does, I've done this, but now I've got this problem. It's like, great, well, let's fix it, and then you can make that contribution, so therefore the person after you, it's even easier for them. So we're making it better all the time. One of our repos, I think the README has got 3,000 contributions to it, and everyone's like, wow, you've got a great README. It's like, but it wasn't on one go, right? We've had so many hundreds of people look at it, make little tweaks here and there, and then it's not perfect still, and there's still more improvements to come, but we're getting there. So yeah, I don't want to put it on a pedestal, basically. I want open source to be for everyone, and that's why I created the shout out now. Eddie Hub community was for everybody to get involved in open source.
That's great. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that? Or...
No, he stole everything.
All right.
Let's get you back.
So I'd like to thank you both for this little moment, and now you should help yourself to some drink, some beverage.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yes.
I love questions.
Yeah, questions.
Ask Calvin all the hard ones, and ask me all the easy ones.
You also have time to ask questions when you have
that's
some
true.
drinks.
Okay.
But yeah, maybe for the people that are listening, maybe we can take one question about open source, or Eddie and Calvin in general.
Or
me.
Marcelo.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I can make. Okay, thank you. So I can make a question. It's more about the way people feel about open source technology, not about open source technology, but being open source. So, on my case, I have some projects, but every time I create a project, I go to private, because I have this. Okay, let's start with something. Then I have to hit public, and I feel like, is this good enough? It's not like, the question is not, does it make sense to go to public? It's like more, is it ready to go to public? Am I going to be criticized about that? So what kind of advice can you give to people? Because I'm sure I'm not the only one who thinks like this. So what kind of advice you can give to people that think the same way or have the same doubts?
Yeah, I used to do that. And that's because that was before I came to open source. I was so used to just the way the world ran in the enterprise world. You don't know what you don't know, but I guess to put it bluntly, you kind of just have to get over yourself. It's not a big deal. How many repositories are out there? Millions. I guarantee you can find a repository and some code out there that's way worse than what you're doing. It's not a big deal. And there's no guarantee a lot of people are even going to see it anyway. So the way I see it, don't go private. There's no point. Just go open. I have repos in my organization that are just like I have a Webpack startup template thing I stuck in there just to save it that I could use later. I haven't touched it in 2 years, but it's there. Who cares if it's public? Because if somebody comes across it who's not familiar with Webpack, they're going to see that and be like, oh, hey, let me just go grab this and learn from it. And I just provided value. I mean, so you just have to stop caring about what other people think. And I know that's hard in such a world with so much social media and everybody saying horrible things about each other and everything else that goes on in the world. But really, to me, in my eyes, it's a personal thing inside. You just got to get over and stop caring about that and don't get upset and don't feed the system. Just do it in public, it's okay.
What he said, do it in public, it's okay. Keep everything public and open. Just always.
Just
I
not
didn't
your
say it.
passwords. Don't do that.
Yeah.
That's great.
We have time.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's up to us. So
Just out of curiosity and talking about contributions, do you feel that cloud native mentality kind of helped contributions or not at all?
I don't know really how to answer that.
Okay, well,
because I'm not as familiar with cloud native stuff. I haven't dealt too much with it.
I'm not sure I can answer that either. And the reason why I say that is I contributed to Kubernetes a month ago, and I didn't contribute again. So without giving details, well, you can see it, it's all public, it's all there in the pull request. But it was interesting. I think a bit like you were saying back in the day, some people still have that mentality of putting people on pedestals. So I think they've done some good things. They've got some amazing technologies, and it's really interesting. I think they've got the CNCF Foundation. Thank you. I couldn't think of the last word. Yeah. They got the CNCF Foundation, which is doing amazing, and it's great. But as always, like everything open source, I think there's more improvements to go, and the only way they can do that is by getting the feedback. So, I fed my feedback back, and I said, hey, as someone who's confident, you can close all my issues in progress. I don't. Not they did that, but I don't care. I don't get offended. But you've got to keep that experience for everyone to get involved, not just for the elite people or whatever you want to call it. So they did lots of good things, but I still think there's more improvements to be had, basically.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of projects that they appear to be open source, but it's just harder because there is different paces going on, right? There is an internal roadmap and people are actively working on it, and then it's harder for you to just take the time, to just get on board with it, and then you look at it the next day, and so things are changing all the time. It's very fast paced, and they don't have the bandwidth. So I've worked with teams where everything is open and they are open source, but it's not like for people, like they are not expecting people to contribute because they know it's very hard to do that. So I'm not so sure if I think most of these projects, because of the technologies, because they are like huge monoliths in a way, it's just very hard to even comprehend what's the architecture of the thing. So just the onboarding cost is very, very high.
I think people shouldn't. Oh, sorry.
No, I was agreeing.
Sorry, I wasn't sure I was interrupting. Also, I think people should worry too much about, I need to contribute to Kubernetes or React because they're the most famous projects. For me, a contribution adds value even if the project's got no stars, and they can still learn from that. They can still grow their network. I contributed to a project a couple of years ago that had 3 stars. And I didn't realize it was one of the engineers at GitHub. I had no idea it was. It's just I wanted to use their project. I put an extra config change, and they thank you very much. And when the conversation grew, hey, I'm a GitHub engineer. I was like, oh, I had no idea. So I think people shouldn't focus too much on the vanity metrics. I mean, they're a metric. Haven't got anything else, but they are quite a vanity metric.
It comes back down to time again, I think, because I've always wanted to, because I'm a big .NET guy, C# guy, and I've been done that. Uh-oh.
Because you said C# and .NET.
No. It should have went off when you said PHP earlier. That would have been better.
Touche. One that's going. Can we just take a photo, everyone?
Yeah.
I think you have to go.
Everyone on the right, squeeze in a bit. Calvin, I'm missing you. What are we missing? I've got Calvin, Marcelo, and my big head. Okay, everyone. 3, 2, 1. And again, just in case I saw you blink. There we go. Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Don't forget to tag us all.
I'll tag you all. Everyone give me a handle, and I apologise for any notifications that you will get.
So what I was saying before, I'm a big C# guy. It's a great language, and Microsoft's one of the biggest open source contributors in the world. And you can contribute to the actual compiler, CLR, C#, and all that stuff. I always thought to myself when I first started getting open source, it'd be really, really cool to be able to do that. And I could say that I contributed to it, but like he said, the thing is massive. It's huge. and the onboarding alone would just take forever, and that's time. And what do we all have? No time. No time. So to say that you can contribute to something smaller, like Eddie said, that's fine. It doesn't have to be super famous. It doesn't have to be huge. You just got to contribute within your own limits in your own life and what you got going on. It all brings value. It's fine.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, so yeah, sorry. Before we go, there's some QR codes over there and over there. If you can just give us some feedback about, you know, the event, and if you have some suggestions for people that can come for the next event, yeah, just let us know, and we'll be happy to, yeah.
Don't do them every like 3 months.
Okay, yeah, it's good feedback.
Do them
That's,
weekly. Okay, monthly.
yeah. Yeah, weekly might be a bit hard, but yeah.
I just gave that big speech about time.
Perhaps we shouldn't end this one until we find the next.
Okay, so everyone stays here until
Let's just do it now.
we just do a brainstorm session. Okay, take care.
There we go.